Hi everyone, thanks for joining in. I'm excited to have Meredith Jaffe joining me again. Great to have you back again, Meredith.
Thank you so much for having me back again, Jackie.
So, a little bit about Meredith. Meredith is the festival director of Story Feast, held on the New South Wales South Coast, and regularly facilitates at other writers' festivals and author events. Previously, she wrote the weekly literary column for the online women's magazine The Hoopla, and her feature articles, reviews, and opinion pieces have also featured in The Guardian Australia, The Huffington Post, and Mamma Mia. Her recent novel was The Dressmakers of Yarradara Prison and was published in 2021 to wide acclaim. And her new book is The Tricky Art of Forgiveness, which I've got my copy there. And just want to say I enjoyed your first book and really loved your new book as well. Really loved like the relationships and everything in them. They kept me reading and wanting to find out what was happening. A little bit of mystery and twists in the book as well.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope you had that kind of experience. That's what I was
Yeah.
aiming for.
Yeah, no, it was great. Just wondering if, and sorry, I should have mentioned as well that thanks to HarperCollins, anyone watching today, if you type a question in comments, you'll have a chance to win a copy of The Tricky Art of Forgiveness. So thanks, Meredith, for joining me. Do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about The Tricky Art of Forgiveness?
Sure. The Tricky Art of Forgiveness centres around the marriage between Diana and Will. They've been together just coming up to their 30th wedding anniversary and also Will's 60th. 30 years of marriage is a long time. I'm sure I'm not telling
Mm.
that to a lot of people who don't already know it. And a few things go wrong at the beginning of the book that make Diana question has their marriage got what it takes to last the next 30 years? Is Will the person that she wants to spend the rest of her life with? And what does that look like when love evolves into a companionship? Once at the start of the novel, they've just become empty. Well, not just become empty nesters, but they've just sold the family home and
Mm.
bought an apartment, which sort of cements the fact that they're empty nesters. And Diana's questioning her purpose in life, who she wants to spend that time with, and who she wants to be now that she's got the freedom to be her own woman.
Mm. And writing about people that age, I think probably in the past it wasn't something that was written about as much, but it does seem like there are a lot more authors writing about people around that sort of age, which is really great because it gives other older readers a chance to be able to relate to people as well, which is great. Just I was talking to you as well before we went live about you were saying your two books are quite different. But I also noticed like your first book was about relationships, probably the father and the daughter, I think. And then this one's about the relationships between the husband and the wife, and also a bit about their children as well. Is that something that you're like interests you or you're passionate about, looking at how different relationships work?
I think all of my novels come down to exactly that question, whether, like you go back to The Fence, it was about not only the relationship between the neighbours,
Mm,
but also between the two women who are at very different stages of their lives. I've talked about women when they get themselves into situations that they later regret or come to regret.
mm,
And I think, it was a real departure for me to write The Dressmakers of Yarradara Prison, because that was obviously set in a prison
mm,
and it was all mainly blokes as the protagonists. This time, and I think it was partly like all of us going through COVID and going, I mean, in our case where we are locally, we'd also been through two sets of bushfires in 2 years.
mm,
The Currawon fire is quite famous. It was a very traumatic time. And then no sooner had we drawn breath than we were hit with this pandemic. And what it really said to me was like, I can't write about the doom and gloom. I need an
mm,
escape from all of this. And so that was partly driven by that. And it evolved into wanting to write, a romantic comedy for women my age and around my age, older, who, we're not dead yet. We're still vibrant human beings, often rediscovering ourselves or, having space to actually make decisions about our lives. And we're going through or gone through menopause. It's a massive change in life. When you think about puberty, which I'm writing about at the moment, and you think about menopause, they're sort of the opposite, the bookends of a woman's life, in the sense that they're massive changes that change our direction. So I really was driven by that conversation as well. But because it was such a dire, revolting time for so many of us, I really wanted to focus on it being a book of joy and an escape from so much of the rubbish that we're still dealing with in our lives. So there was no book comes from one place. It might start in one place, but we definitely wanted it to be a story where we could be, I might be 57, well I am, but I still feel the same feels that I've always felt. And I so often in literature, and you just said that it's changing, but so often in literature, you sort of feel like saying, I'm not dead yet.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, well, all I'm yearning for is my grandchildren or, going on cruises or whatever the thing is, and not just acknowledging that women are still vibrant, complex women with different and competing needs, and that we still feel the way we felt and want to continue to feel the way we felt, no matter what the number is that's on our birthday. So I really wanted to talk about that issue because I just feel it's just not talked about enough, that we're stereotyped so often in literature as being, oh, my grandchildren, well, that's great, but that's only, hopefully for most of us, only a part of our day, not our how we define ourselves as human beings.
Yeah, no, exactly. I totally agree. Yeah. So could you share with us what the first thought that came into your mind when you started to think about writing The Tricky Art of Forgiveness?
Well, because you've read the book, this will probably resonate with you, and maybe not if you haven't read the book. So the very first thought that came into my mind was, I was driving past our local cinema. I live in a regional part of Australia, and I was driving past our local cinema, and I always say to myself, I'm going to go to the movies. I love going to the movies. I never go to the movies. I never have any time. But one day I was driving past, and I had this vision of a woman sitting in the cinema on her own, and at the back kind of, and there was no one else there. It was like she was just in the cinema, and I was going, I wonder who she is, and I wonder why she's alone, and all those kind of questions. And then one day I was driving past, and she was there again, except this time there was a man sitting a few rows in front of her, but also on his own. And I was like, oh, what's that about? So you've read the book.
Yeah.
And really, that was the kernel of the idea. Obviously then transposed onto that, as I said, the issues around women being invisible and women supposedly lacking agency, etc. But it was that sense of, well, is she married? Does she have a husband? Why is she there? And why is she finding comfort sitting in the dark in the middle of the day in a movie theatre?
Yeah. And what sort of feedback are you getting from readers? Are you getting a lot of readers relating to the people in this book?
On so many different levels, Jackie.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, every time I do a book signing, for instance, I have women who come up to me and go, 54 years this year. And I'm always like, congratulations, that's a very big number. So there's sort of that end of the spectrum. I think a lot of people, Diana, as you know in the novel, is an incredibly talented musician. She subjugated her own career aspirations because of family, and her husband travels for work a lot, and she realizes in the novel that she's lost a part of herself by not allowing that creative self to flourish. And so I have had a lot of women who've told me about their experiences and rediscovering what lights their fire. You know, it might be pottery, it might be yoga, it might be, you know, running along beaches, whatever the thing is. So I think there's not a literal connection to Diana as a character, but more that yearning that we have, like, oh, when I've got more time, or if I had more time, or when this thing happens, you know, once my kids finish school, or whatever the thing is, that we kind of we do crave to carve out a part of, you know, our day to be about the things that we care about, whatever that thing may be. So a lot of the feedback has been around that. But I must say, I've actually had some blokes as well who've come to me and gone, you know, well, I had one guy who said to me, well, your book really resonated with me because 6 days before my 10th wedding anniversary, my wife and I realised that we weren't going to make the next 10.
Okay.
And so while the rest of the family were sort of like, party, they're like, yeah, no thanks. So, you know, and I've got a neighbour, an elderly neighbour who lives, we're on a farm, so he lives on the farm next, and he was like, oh my God, this is exactly how it felt when we split up. And I do think a lot of people, as we know, statistically, do split up at that time when they become empty nesters, or when they look at each other across the proverbial breakfast table and go, why am I here? So I think that there's been a lot of resonance with people who have reached that crossroads and gone, I don't think so.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. And I know a lot of my friends around similar ages, like exactly the same sort of things happened as well. I've got a few questions coming in, which is great. Just want to say to people watching that thanks to HarperCollins, if you've got a question for Meredith, please type it in comments and I can read it out, and you'll have a chance to win a copy of The Tricky Art of Forgiveness. Sharon says she's loved both of your books and she wonders how long each book has taken you to write.
Oh, every book is such a different journey. So I started writing, so the idea for a book often happens a lot earlier than the actual writing of it. And so Dressmakers came from reading an article, when I was back at the Hoopla, reading an article about Esther Freud, and that led to Fine Cell Work. And then I had this idea for Guys in Prison making a wedding dress, not writing it. But the journey from actually sitting down with, as it were, pen to page, of course, Word document, to publication was about 4 years. It was really hard, that novel, because it's world building to have to move into an environment you know nothing about, a male prison. Whereas Tricky Art, so it also depends where you are in your contract. For those of you who are writing and wanting to be published or are being published, it depends what your contractual deadlines are as well. So Tricky Art was probably from word to go about 16, 18 months.
Okay.
So, and I'm writing now, so I've got a novel coming out in March again, and I wrote the first draft of that between January and March this year, and I'm editing that now. So it's sort of seems to be getting shorter, right? Look, I think anyone who puts out a book a year, and I'm not referring to myself, but I'm thinking of all those, you know, great people like Candace Fox and Sally Hepworth and Rachel Johns and Michael Robotham and people like that. You have to be very disciplined to get over for that to happen, and you have to have a really strong editorial team behind you who are, you know, basically holding you up, because you're not handing in your best homework in the way that as a beginner writer you're told, don't hand it in unless you've done this, and this. It's a different space. So the upside of that is I'm learning to plan more than I used to, and I'm learning to write more efficiently and in a much more disciplined way than possibly when you're not on contract. I just going, oh wow, I'll just figure it out.
Yeah. And I know I spoke to you when The Dressmaker of Yarrajara Prison came out, and I know you did quite a bit of research for that. How was The Tricky Art of Forgiveness? Did that have less research?
Different, yes, absolutely, because it wasn't world building, it was a world that was a lot more familiar to me. And like, to be honest, I kind of needed a break from that massive research experience of dressmakers. But having said that, I did spend a lot of time researching. Well, I'm not going to, one of the subjects I won't say because it's a spoiler, but the main crisis, shall we say, in the marriage, I spent a lot of time researching, and also late life crisis with men and stuff, you know, and just looking at sort of the broader issues around what affects people around this sort of 50s and 60s age group and decisions. So, but nowhere near as onerous. And it's funny, like this one's, the one I'm writing at the moment, is sort of in the middle, you know, like there's certain parts of it I'm having to do a lot of research on, and other parts of it that are coming more naturally.
And can you tell us anything about the one you're writing at the moment?
Sure. So the working title, you know how it is in publishing, Jackie, it could be something completely different.
Yeah.
But the working title is Friends, Secrets, Lies. And it's about a triangle, if you like, of three women who've been friends since university, with sort of, as you know, with friendships, they sort of wax and wane a bit and sort of change shape a little bit. And two of the women go away on holidays, and there is an incident that happens on the holiday that threatens both their friendship, their marriages, their professions, and the third arm of that friendship. And I don't kind of want to give too much away at the moment because it's got some really critical threads when we look at female sexuality and how so boxed around, boys are supposed to sow their wild oats, but girls are supposed to keep the temple pure. Well, how does that actually work? So, and how you take your lived experience as a mother into your own parenting of your teens, and particularly now when it's so, alive around consent, and we're talking a lot more about agency, when we didn't necessarily have the same kind of experiences. So it's a bit complex. Lots of female characters, lots of generational stuff again. So a really horrendous second main character who I hope people will love to hate. It also talks about social media and the press, and so it's fun.
Yeah,
it's fun.
Sounds very intriguing. So sorry, I missed halfway through editing. Is that what you said? Sorry.
Beg your pardon?
What did you say? You're halfway through editing? Is that right?
Halfway through the structural edit at the moment, and it's due to come out in March. So it'll be bang, bang, bang. Dressmakers, tricky art, and then whatever it's called, but Friends, Secrets, Lies.
No, sounds great. Kelly wonders, what's been your favourite part of your writing journey so far?
There's so many different bits of it I love. I mean, I love the whole sitting down. I know a lot of people don't say this. I love sitting down with a blank page and going, create something. I'm not saying it's pain-free, but I absolutely love that journey. I love, I'm not mad on the editing side of it. It's a bit painful. Okay, why have you said this? And why are you doing that? And this is wrong. And this is right. So that can be a bit tedious, but it's really wonderful when you start to see that filtering process come through by the time you get into the point where it's almost a book, and seeing your words start to shine when you get rid of all your rubbish. You know? The editors are like, get rid of that, get rid of it. I love that. And I absolutely love going out and meeting readers. It's like, I just love being in front of readers. And I don't even mind if people say, I don't like this that much. Because to me, reading is about connection. I don't know how you read, but I'm reading, I read friends' books, I read as widely as I can because I'm really curious about other people's storytelling. I don't have to agree, or it's hard as a writer. You always go, you should have done this, you should have done that. But I love it when you find a book that you just, press to your heart and go, you should read this.
Yeah.
So I'm quite relaxed about people not necessarily loving all my work equally, or not everyone responding to my work equally, because it is just one book. I'm hoping to write lots more. And if we all think back about some of our favourite authors, we don't sit there and go, I love all of your work equally. We do have favourites, and we have favourites within genres and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's good to be relaxed about it and just have the conversation. And God forbid you could take something away from the experience to take into the next book as well.
And have you been able to get out much to meet readers for your new book?
Not as much as we used to, Jackie.
Yeah.
There's still a sort of not a reticence. I think there's an absolute, pent up desire to have lots of author events, but I still think there is that degree of people being concerned about going to live events as much. And plus, as we all know, with every workforce being decimated by absences due to COVID, some of the things I've been doing have been put off multiple times because they just didn't have the staff at the time. So it hasn't been and isn't normalised. But you know what? I'm very grateful for every opportunity I get. And I think one of the great things about COVID is a lot of readers have been connecting with authors and new releases, etc., much more via social media than they probably used to, because that's the avenue. Well, let's face it, there's not much in print media in terms of reviews anymore. So really, those book clubs on Facebook and the bookstagrammers on Instagram and TikTok are having a massive influence, as we know from the top 10, about how people are reading and how they're accessing information about books. Maybe it will never go back the way it was, and that's fine. It just, we all have to adjust, but it is different, definitely.
Yeah. And Sharon wonders what genre you like to read, and if maybe you've read anything lately you could recommend to us.
Sure. I'm not particularly genre specific, and sometimes I do consciously read outside of my genre just because it's very easy, isn't it? Just to kind of pick up the next one, the next big thing. So I do read a bit of crime, but I'm not a massive crime reader. And one of the reasons I'm not a massive crime reader is I kind of got a bit sick of women and children being mutilated. So I kind of steered away from the kind of books that do that. But I do love a psychological thriller. I love Michael Robotham. I really enjoyed Danuka Mackenzie's debut, The Torrent, which has a pregnant cop as the female protagonist, or obviously female if she's pregnant. It has... she was a bit prescient because the flood that she's talking about in the northern New South Wales has actually obviously come to pass. But it's a really tight debut that won the Banjo award. Has everyone picked up Lessons in Chemistry, the Bonnie Garmus book? Amazing book, so quirky and fun, about Elizabeth Stott, a female chemist. It's 1961 when the book starts, and she is subject to all the misogyny that you would expect and makes life decisions for necessity. And she's a great character in the way that when we read, Eleanor Oliphant is fine. She's one of those kind of characters where you go, she's not kind of real, but you just champion her because she's a scientist, she's a chemist, as she said, and so she's very sort of quite black and white about stuff. But it's a tremendous debut, and I really, really enjoyed that too. And the third one, last one, is from another Australian author, debut author. I don't know if you picked up Genevieve Novak's book, No Hard Feelings.
Yes, I just spoke to her a few nights ago.
Isn't she wonderful?
Yeah,
and
her book was
it
great.
surprised me, Jackie, because I have children that are Genevieve's age, and so I wondered how much I was going to get out of her writing about that 20-somethings period. But I have to say, I laughed and I cringed and I wanted to hug her because the character Penny just embodies all that. Like you're 20, you think you're so grown up in your 20s until you have to start traversing the horrible landscape of careers and relationships, and some friends are going better at their careers than you. Other friends are hooking up with future partners. Some maybe even having babies. And just here's Penny at the centre of this novel who's just not doing any of it right. And Genevieve writes with such humour and warmth that I was actually surprised how much I really enjoyed that journey with Penny. So I really recommend that as another debut too.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you on that as well. But yeah, thanks for those recommendations. Kelly says she loves the title. It's very catchy. she wonders if you chose the title. And I also wonder, you said before, like what your working title was for your book at the moment. Did you have a working title for this book?
So we're now moving into what I would call the publishing sales marketing conversation. So, you create the work, you slave over it, you submit it, you hope they love it. But really, it then becomes a partnership. So I always defer to anything my publisher says about covers and titles. So the first novel, The Fence, was my title. The Making of Christina was my title. The Dressmakers of Yarrandarra wasn't. It was my publisher's title. The Tricky Art of Forgiveness was originally called I Forgive You, because that's what's said in the note. But sales and marketing stepped in and said, no, it needs to have a more sort of longer title. And I'm sort of branded in my publishing house as gritty but pretty. So they wanted something that sort of reflects that sort of, my writing does deal with tough topics, but I don't deal with it in a way that I like to slam you over the head with it. So my publisher actually came back with The Tricky Art of Forgiveness, and I thought it was great. So I just went, so I did. So at the moment we're working with Friend Secret Lies, and she hasn't taken that to sales and marketing yet. So they might go, great tagline, not a great title. Who knows? I've always because they always ask you, don't get me wrong, they always go, what do you want to call it? And you go, ooh. And I think it's probably more often than not that the author's title doesn't stick. The working title is probably Friend Secret Lies, tells you exactly what that book is about. So that's good in the keep it simple principle, but I don't know if it'll end up being the title, but I guess we'll find out in about 6 months.
Yeah. And Kathy's got an interesting question. She says, once you have an idea for your book, what is your process for pulling your ideas together?
I suppose it depends how strong the idea is. Like, I know what the next book's about, for instance. So there's a lot of time spent what I call percolating. It's just sitting around in your back of your head, and might come up with a great name for the cat in the story, or you might come up with how contemporary is the novel or whatever. A character generally comes to me more than plot to start with. I've always found that I'm engaged with what I consider a person, a figment of my imagination, for quite some time. And then often I will sit down and write 20, 30,000 words of that whole character's backstory as I get to know who they are. But then you really do, well, for me, I'm not a pantser, so you really do then need to go, well, what's the story that hangs around that person? What's driving? And I like to come from a character-driven perspective rather than a plot-driven perspective. So I want to know what that character's issues are and what the grit will be to make that pearl, as it were, and plot then is usually something that I have to, that's why I write an outline. I have to kind of go, well, I need these moments in the novel to happen, so what are the things that are going to turn? But I'm far more fascinated by what I call everyone calls the inner and outer conflict, your higher ambitions, your better self, who you want to be versus the little person inside you that maybe undermines you or is threatened by the stuff that's around you. And I'm really interested in that dynamic, and all of us, me included, that we are not always our higher selves. And the great thing about novels is characters are made up, so they can behave appallingly and or honourably or whatever the thing may be, in a way that like when you had an argument with someone and afterwards, wish I'd said that. In a novel, you get to do the I wish I'd said that moment at the time and go, I see you, sister, and this is what I'm going to say, in a way that you don't do. So that's part of the fun of unraveling the plot as well. It's like trying to remember that you have to make them much, that they're not us. They're bigger than us or smaller than us.
And you have some really great characters in all of your books. If you could be a character from one of your books for a day, who would you choose and why?
I'm going to go with who came into my brain first, because that probably tells you something. Joey Maloney. from dressmakers I would definitely want to be. But then you know what, like Diana in The Tricky Art, I wish I could sing like Aretha Franklin.
Yeah.
I wish I could play piano. I wish I could just sit down and just let it all hang out, you know, and just be superb. It's just a talent that I would yearn for, but I yearn for a lot of talents because a lot of people are saying that, you know, what do you wish you could do? Like, oh, I wish I was creative. And they go, huh? And I go, oh, well, you know, like I can't draw, I can't paint, I can't sing, I can't play an instrument, I can't sculpt, I can't do a whole lot of things. But so I guess I always imbue my characters with a bit of wishful thinking. But yeah, definitely Joey Maloney because he's so vibrant and he's so ruthless in pursuing his goals in the novel, and yet he's so vulnerable. But also Diana, because, you know, in the end she gets what she wants.
Yeah. And when you, like you said, you do quite a lot of planning and that before you start writing. When you're at the start, do you know how your book's going to end?
Usually I've got a pretty good idea. I just need to figure out. I'm usually pretty good at knowing the start, how it starts and how it ends, but it's just then connecting the dots to make that interesting. And also, like I don't want my readers to pick up my books and go, oh, it's just exactly the same as the other book or the book before. So I'm not interested in that. And I guess, I mean, I don't really write in genre either. I mean, commercial fiction is a very broad church of writing. So I don't feel constrained by that in a way that, you know, if I wrote crime or historical fiction or whatever, that I might feel more that I needed to stick to certain ways of writing. But I definitely look for, I want a great cast of characters that I want to hang out with. I want them to behave outrageously or at least against type. And I want to read, and I kind of like writing them where, and you know from Tricky Art of Forgiveness, where you think the novel's going in a certain direction and then you hit a point, you hit the story up, and I just completely turn it on its head and go, no, we're not going there, we're going here. And people are like, what happened? And I quite enjoy throwing all those speed bumps in and making life complicated as well.
And do you have any writing routines?
Absolutely. I have to say, like, one of my virtues as a writer, there's not many, is that I'm really disciplined.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've spoken to Di Morrissey before, and Di, who's an ex-journo, she's always said to me, it's all about the bum glue, and it's true. It is literally about turning up, sitting down, and staying there, which is much harder than it sounds. And I've got a gammy hip to pay for it. But I start when the kids go to school. And so my kids are teenagers now. So they're out the door at 8:15. I'm down at my desk. Probably by the time I've faffed around, it's 8:30. I usually run out of steam sometime around between 2 and 3, and I'll just do general admin type stuff. But I start every day and I start 3 chapters. Wherever I am in the story, I start 3 chapters before that point, and then I read and I just go through it again and again and again and again. So I'm really just, I love a deadline, so that works really well for me, being told we need the manuscript by whatever date, and I just sit and do it, and I chunk it down. Like one of the things I think is really important about writing, because it's hard to sit at your desk all day and wonder what you're going to do next, is I think it's really, really important to set your little mini goals for the day or the week, whatever. So every novel I write, I go, it's 100,000 words, which it may or may not be. It's due in on this date. How many weeks have I got? Divide it by the number of weeks. Divide it by 6 days. Divide it by 6 days. That's how many words you have to write a week. And then conversely, when I'm editing, I know how long the novel is at that point or what it should be. And then I just go, well, that's at the moment, for instance, it's 15 pages a day. So that's what I've got to do to make my deadline. So I think it's different for everyone. I'm not for one moment suggesting that people should adopt my method. But I think it's really important to adopt a method. I was Tony Birch, the Australian writer from Victoria. He always works in the morning, 4 hours. That's it. You know, everyone has their thing. Some people, I remember Fiona McIntosh saying before she was, you know, famous enough or earning enough money that she could afford to write full time, she had Fridays and she had nights, and that was it. So everyone cuts and dices it their own way. But I think what the consistent message is, you have to be disciplined, even if you only have 1 hour a day to write, or you can only write when the kids are at soccer training, or you can only write between, I don't know, midnight and 1. Fiona Higgins wrote the Mother's Group book while breastfeeding her child in the wee hours of the morning. Like, whatever works for you. But I do think that irrespective, novels don't write themselves. So however you have to find what works for you without sending yourself insane or your family.
Yeah, it sounds like you have quite a structured process. And when you are writing, do you have a favourite snack or drink?
Well, definitely from 8 o'clock in the morning till midday, it's coffee.
Yeah.
So I don't really eat breakfast, but I do need my coffee. Yeah, that's probably the go-to. And then if I have to go into town to get groceries or something after, like about 2 o'clock, it's generally a Snickers bar, which is really naughty because I should have something sensible like a salad or something like that. It's generally just crap. And then I have a really wholesome. I do enjoy stopping work for the day and cooking a meal because that's a creative thing for me as well. And so I do enjoy sitting down and making a really nice dinner and having a glass of wine. Generally, if I finish work about 3 o'clock, I generally spend some time because I have sort of a hiatus before the kids get home, and that's when I'll do some intensive reading. And then I tend to go to bed really early, and then I read until I go to sleep as well. So that's kind of my chunks of reading. I think, as everyone knows, all writers are going to say, read, read broadly, read everything, read whatever you like. But it is that I really like to stay in touch with what my friends and colleagues and other Australian writers are doing and what's hot, like I think, like everyone, Still Life, was a massive book for us all last year. So it just, it's good to stay in touch with what other people are talking about as well. And,
And Kathy wonders if contractual deadlines cause you stress.
Kathy, you are so right. They can do. Less so as a kind of, because the novel I'm writing at the moment is my 5th adult novel, my 6th published, will be my 6th published novel. Less so now. I think when I first started out, it was like, drop everything, have to do this thing about every stage of the process, which made it really, really stressful for me and my family because I was like, no, I've got to do this whole thing. And I'm a bit like that as a person. When I'm learning the ropes of whatever the new thing is, I can kind of over-engineer everything that I do. But now I'm kind of like, well, if I just go 15 pages a day for this period of time, it'll get done. And that gives me, 5 days left to read it all through and probably freak out and go, oh my God, I can't believe I'm handing this in. But yeah, it's not it's not the same process. It's like I've got really relaxed about book titles and book covers and all that kind of stuff. It's like I'm in charge of creating the story and I'm in charge of making it the best story I possibly can. And publishers on the whole actually want you to publish the best book you can as well. So they're not, I wouldn't say that they're cracking the whip and telling you. I mean, I'm sure there must be times like that. I mean, I remember Marcus Clay telling me how he was supposed to hand Bridget Clay in, I think, like, I don't know, a year or two after Book Thief. Okay. And he handed in 13 years late.
Yeah.
So I guess, when you're Marcus Zuzak, you can do that. But you'd be surprised how often that happens. Like, deadlines are flexible. And also, stuff happens in people's lives. Like, friends of mine who have been doctors through the pandemic have not been able to meet publishing deadlines because they've been a bit busy saving lives or doing clinics or whatever. And publishers are humans too. They do get that. And books get moved all the time. I'm not going to name and shame anyone, but there's a book that's coming out this year that's moved 3 times that I know of. And that's great because they should be making it the best book it could possibly be. There's a lot riding on it. So better to move the date than to put something out that everyone goes, what is this rubbish? So
exactly.
Deadlines are your friend and your enemy. It's much easier to write when you're on deadline because it really keeps you focused than if you're just writing for yourself. So if you're not on a contract, I would highly recommend setting deadlines, even though your higher brain will say, but it's artificial. But, you need to motivate your primitive brain sit down and actually do the work.
Mm-hmm. And Storyfest, is there any plans for that? I know you haven't been able to do it the last few years because of COVID, but are there plans for upcoming?
So we decided, we had to cancel 2020,
Mm.
and then in all honesty, having that 2-year hiatus was brilliant because it's a small team. So we held the festival in 2021, that we would make it a 2-year festival. So
Okay.
and also small regional. We wanted to keep it fresh. You don't want to run into, I think people just go, oh, ho-hum, it's Storyfest again. But I've actually stepped away from Storyfest in February this year because of my writing commitments.
Okay.
So I'm no longer at the helm of that, although involved on the periphery as you like just don't dump them in it kind of thing. And I'm sure, and I'll be at the festival. But there's a brilliant new team now running Storyfest. It will be back in 2023 in June, and given how much Australian publishing at the moment is producing so many amazing works, I'm sure there'll be an amazing guest list, and I will still be spruiking it on my social pages, etc. But it just got to the point where, speaking of deadlines and bum glue and everything, but I was getting to the point where I was doing 7 days a week trying to balance everything. And creatively, you just end up in burnout. So I had to make the hard decision to step away and focus on my publishing commitments for the time being. You never know. Never say never.
Yeah. And Kelly wonders what the hardest part of being a writer has been for you other than deadlines.
Oh, you don't earn anything. I think, it was interesting. I was watching the 7, was it 7:30? No, maybe the drum tonight before it came on, and we're just talking about the arts policies between the parties, and it breaks your heart how culture is the very reason we exist, and when it seems so sad that we struggle to convince our political masters, as it were, that the arts is important. It isn't just performing arts. It is the writers. There's so much focus, and not saying this is a bad thing. The love should be spread. Of course, we want theatre and music and all those different things, but it's really sad that the last 10 years has been dominated by the fact that the arts is somehow, the arts has somehow been diminished. So it's exciting to think that, the Australian Publishing Association, the Australian Society of Authors, the Australian Booksellers Association are collaborating to really, champion how important it is to have Australian stories, whether it's on our screens, whether it's what we're reading, particularly for our children. They need to be able to look, in a book or on a screen and recognise their stories. And I think that's really what it comes down to. And if you don't fund the arts, which has been, sadly a true thing for a while, not only is society diminished, but, you're forcing people who are creative to find other avenues to earn money, et cetera, et cetera. And so everything suffers. We all suffer if we don't support the arts. So I guess when I say money, I didn't literally mean my pay packet, not that I get a pay packet, but I just meant it's really sad that things like digital lending rights has not got up still, that we're still arguing about some of these issues, for a very long time. And, I'm not trying to make this political, but it is just frustrating that we are still talking about it and not seeing action rather than just platitudes around artists as if we should be patted on the head and aren't you lovely. And yet, did you not notice that with the flood concerts only last week, I think it was, all those artists were donating their time for free to raise money for the flood victims. And it's that sort of dichotomy between the wonderful people who work in the arts and the political apparatchik that doesn't recognise the value. But I just think that all of us in the middle, the consumers, we love it. We couldn't imagine our life without it. It's just there's such a disconnect at the moment. So I think when I say money, I would really like to see, the arts flourish in Australia again. It would be fantastic. Australian film, Australian television shows, Australian books, Australian music, all of it. It would be brilliant.
No, very true. Well, thanks so much for joining me. It's been great talking to you and great to have you back again. And really loved reading The Tricky Art of Forgiveness. So thanks for writing it for us all. And hope that I can have a chance to talk to you again when you have your next book out.
I hope so too.
Before you go, do you want to just let people know how they can keep in touch with you?
Absolutely. So I'm quite active on Instagram. It's my favourite platform. So you can find me at Meredith Jaffe Author. Same tag for Facebook and on website. So I have a newsletter that goes out every 2 months where I do giveaways, talk about books, talk about what's going on in the world. And that's, you can subscribe to that on my website, which is Meredith that was my email address, meredithjaffe.com. Same diff, Meredith at meredithjaffe.com. It's not that private. But yeah, so people can get in contact. And I love having conversations with people. So please don't ever hesitate to talk to me if you want to talk about any stuff. I always like to put some time aside in my day just to have a chat. So please do.
Well, thank you. And also thanks to everyone who joined in and the questions we got.
Yes, thank you so much for some great questions.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.